Welcome to Biblical Insight. Stop for a second and ask yourself an honest question. Where are you right now? Not physically, I mean spiritually, emotionally, in the core of who you are. Are you in that space where you feel like you've been overlooked, passed by, or worse, completely forgotten? That place where your gifts seem irrelevant, your potential feels wasted, and the dreams you once carried now feel like cruel jokes? Listen, I'm not interested in giving you a polished sermon today. I want to have a real conversation about what happens when you find yourself in a place you never imagined. A place of desolation, isolation, and complete barrenness. Because here's the truth. Most of the people God used powerfully in Scripture spent significant time in exactly those kinds of places. What I'm going to share with you today might challenge everything you think you know about how God works. It's called rising from the ashes, when God finds you in your forgotten place. So settle in, open your heart, and let's walk through this together. Here's something most people miss about this story in 2 Samuel 9. David didn't stumble across Mephibosheth by accident. He went looking for him. Read that again. The king actively searched for someone from a fallen dynasty, someone who, by all political logic, should have been eliminated, not elevated. David asks his servants, "Is there anyone left from Saul's family? Anyone I can show kindness to because of Jonathan?" Now, think about the weight of that question. David is secure on his throne. The wars are over. He has zero political obligation to honor a covenant made years ago with a dead friend. But integrity doesn't work that way. Covenant doesn't expire because circumstances change. The Bible calls David a man after God's own heart, and people misunderstand what that means. It doesn't mean he was sinless. His failures were catastrophic. What it means is this: he was a man who repented every single time he realized he was wrong. That's what righteousness actually looks like. Not perfection, but a heart that stays soft toward God. David's search for Mephibosheth is a mirror of how God searches for you. God doesn't wait for you to clean yourself up, get your act together, or prove you're worthy. He comes looking. He initiates. He remembers promises you've forgotten. But here's where it gets interesting. David's friendship with Jonathan wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. Jonathan grew up in the palace. He knew protocol, etiquette, the way power structures worked. David was anointed, yes, but he was a shepherd boy who smelled like sheep. He had no framework for royalty. Jonathan gave him access to a world he couldn't have entered alone. You need to understand this. Sometimes the barrier between you and your destiny isn't your anointing, it's your access. You can have the gifts, the calling, the potential, but if you don't know the protocol of the rooms you're meant to occupy, you'll stay stuck outside. You need someone who can open doors and teach you how to navigate spaces where you feel like an outsider. David never forgot what Jonathan gave him, and now, years later, he's looking for anyone from Jonathan's family to honor that debt. That search leads to a man in a place that's about to become painfully familiar. Be honest with yourself for a moment. Knowing that God is searching for you is comforting, sure, but recognizing the place where He finds you, that's where transformation actually starts. That's where pride dies and truth begins. The servants find Mephibosheth in a town called Lo-debar. If you've never studied Hebrew, you might think that's just a random location. It's not. Lo-debar is a prophetic description of spiritual bankruptcy. The name literally breaks down into lo, meaning no or not, and debar, meaning pasture, word, or thing. Put it together. No pasture, no word, no thing. It's a place where nothing grows, where there's no revelation, and where you have absolutely nothing to work with. It's the geographic manifestation of hopelessness. No pasture means you're in a barren environment. There's no fertile ground for your gifts to take root. You're spiritually and professionally parched. You keep trying to plant seeds, but the soil is dead. No word means you have zero prophetic direction. You're operating in complete spiritual silence. You pray, you seek, you listen, but heaven feels sealed. You're stumbling in the dark with no guidance on what to do next. No thing means you have no resources, no capital, no tools, no help. You're staring at empty hands and an empty future. What's your Lo-debar? Is it depression that's paralyzed your will? An addiction you can't break free from? A relationship that's destroyed your sense of worth? A financial collapse that's left you with nothing? That dry, desolate, isolated place where you feel completely forgotten, that's your Lo-debar. The most demonic lie Lo-debar tells you is this: you've fallen so far that God can't reach you anymore. You're off his radar. He's moved on to people who aren't as broken, as compromised, as stuck as you are. That's a lie straight from hell. God knew exactly where Mephibosheth was. God knows exactly where you are. The depth of your pit doesn't determine the length of God's reach. But here's the twist. What if the place itself isn't the problem? What if the real issue is how you're seeing it? Jacob's story in Genesis 28 destroys the myth that God only shows up in beautiful, comfortable places. Jacob is running for his life toward a place called Haran, a name that means dry, parched, barren. Sound familiar? It's the Old Testament version of Lo-debar. He's alone in the wilderness, terrified, with nothing but a rock for a pillow. And in that desolate place, he has a dream that changes everything. He sees a ladder connecting heaven and earth, with angels ascending and descending. When he wakes up, he says something profound. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. Think about that phrase, I was not aware of it. God was there the entire time. Jacob was so consumed by his circumstances, so focused on the barrenness around him, that he was completely blind to the divine presence right in front of him. God had to put him to sleep, literally shut down his natural vision, so his spiritual eyes could open. That's the principle. We walk by faith, not by sight. Sometimes God has to close your natural eyes so you can finally see what's real. This is your invitation today. Stop staring at the empty bank account, the broken relationship, the failed business, the chronic illness. Ask God to open your spiritual eyes to see that He's present in the chaos. He's in your hospital room. He's in your courtroom. He's in your empty house. He's in your depression. He's in your confusion. And here's the command that changes everything. When you can't get out of your situation, let God into it. Let God in. Let God in. Let God in. Stop fighting for an escape route and start inviting the divine into the room with you. Because when God enters your mess, one of three things happens. He brings supernatural comfort, a peace that makes absolutely no logical sense to anyone watching your life. He brings profound development, using the pressure not to crush you, but to refine your character and strengthen your resolve. Or He transforms the entire situation, because He's the ultimate transformer who specializes in impossible reversals. How do you let Him in? Through gratitude. Gratitude is an act of spiritual warfare against the spirit of Lo-debar. It shifts your focus from what's missing to what remains. Paul modeled this in 2 Corinthians 4, 8, and 9. He lists every hardship and follows each one with a defiant but. We are hard-pressed, but not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. We are persecuted, but not abandoned. We are struck down, but not destroyed. The power is in the but. The but is the spiritual reality you activate by choosing gratitude. Here's the secret. As your gratitude increases, your awareness of God's presence increases. God specializes in nothingness. He stepped into the void in Genesis 1 and spoke light into darkness. He's the God who creates something out of nothing. But even after he calls you out of the darkness, there's one final battle you must be ready to fight. You know what most people don't realize? Getting out of Lo-debar isn't the victory. The real fight, the one that determines your entire future, is getting Lo-debar out of you. You can leave the prison, but still think like a prisoner. This is where the story gets heartbreaking. Mephibosheth is physically removed from Lo-debar, brought into the king's palace, given wealth and honor, but internally, he's still living in that wasteland. The Lo-debar mentality never left him. When he stands before King David, listen to what comes out of his mouth. "Who is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me?" Stop right there. That's not humility. That's deep, toxic shame speaking. A dead dog, in that culture, was the lowest possible expression of worthlessness, garbage to be avoided. He's the grandson of a king, and he sees himself as refuse. Lo-debar convinced him he was worthless, and he internalized that lie so completely that even standing in the palace, he can't see himself as anything more than trash. The proof that this mentality still controlled him comes later in the story. David restores all of Saul's land to him, a massive generational inheritance. But Mephibosheth passively gives it all away to a servant named Ziba, saying, "I'm just happy you're safe, my lord." On the surface, that sounds noble. In reality, it's catastrophic. He traded generational wealth for a free meal. He had a son named Micah, and in that moment, he betrayed his son's future. The Lo-debar mentality whispered that he was only worthy of charity, not legacy. So he prioritized immediate comfort over generational responsibility. How did this happen? Go back to his childhood. When Mephibosheth was 5 years old, his nurse heard that King Saul and Jonathan had been killed. In her panic, she grabbed the boy and ran. But in her fear and haste, she dropped him. That fall crippled him for life. 2 warnings emerge from this tragedy. The danger of unfocused panic. The nurse ran fast, but without direction. Speed without focus is dangerous. Direction is infinitely more important than velocity. Proverbs 4:25 says, "Let your eyes look straight ahead. Fix your gaze directly before you." When you're afraid, the first thing you need is focus, not speed. Focus transforms pain into power. The danger of toxic association. It wasn't Mephibosheth who fell. It was the person carrying him. Who you run with can cripple you. 1 Corinthians 15:33 warns, "Bad company corrupts good character." If the people carrying your destiny are fearful and unfocused, they can cause you to fall. This internal struggle is real. But even in our brokenness, even with our crippled identity, there's a place prepared where none of that matters. Despite all of Mephibosheth's brokenness, insecurity, and self-sabotage, David's promise stands. "You will always eat at my table." Not just the land, not just the wealth, the table. What's so significant about the king's table? It's the one place where your weakness is completely covered. When you're seated at a royal table, nobody can see your wheelchair, your cane, your limp. The table hides everything below it. At the table, you're not defined by your inability to walk. You're defined as a king's child, fully included in the fellowship. This is a prophetic picture of communion. When Jesus invites you to his table, he covers your flaws, your failures, your history of brokenness. At his table, you're not identified by your crippled past. You're identified by the king's covenant of grace. The table was the only place Mephibosheth felt normal. It was the only place where his disability didn't define him. This is the prophetic call for your life today. Rise from your personal Lo-debar, from your shame, your isolation, your excuses. The king is inviting you to his table. Come and dine without money and without price. Every flaw, every inability, every scar from being dropped is covered by the king himself. The table is the only place you'll feel truly normal, where your identity is established not by the trauma of your past, but by the king's unbreakable covenant. Thank you for spending this time with me on Biblical Insight. Remember, you're being summoned to trade your Lo-debar mentality for a king's table identity, an identity defined not by brokenness and lack, but by grace and belonging. This isn't theory. It's something you can live out starting today. Examine your internal landscape. Where are you settling for just a free meal when the king has offered you both intimacy and inheritance? Use prayer and gratitude to actively transform your surroundings. Think of one person you know living in their own Lo-debar and extend to them the hope of the king's table. Stay tuned for our next conversation. Keep believing, keep growing, and keep pressing forward.